Have you ever watched someone lie about you, straight to your mother's face, while your mother nodded along and believed every single word? My sister Diane stood in the middle of our mother's living room. She was holding a manila folder, the kind you buy in a 3-pack at the dollar store, like she had spent all week preparing for this moment. And maybe she had. She held it up like it was evidence at a trial and said, loud enough for every person in that room to hear, "Mom, Sandra has been stealing from you. I have the proof right here." There were 7 people in that room. My cousin Janet, her husband, 2 of my mother's oldest friends from church, my mother's neighbor Gloria, and my mother, Eleanor, sitting in the blue armchair by the window, her hands folded in her lap, looking at me with an expression I had never once seen on her face before. Doubt. I looked at Diane. I took a slow breath. And then, very quietly, I looked at my mother and I said, "Go ahead, Diane. Show her." Diane blinked. Just for a second, something flickered behind her eyes. She had not expected that. She had expected tears. Denial. Panic. She had expected me to crumble in front of everyone and make her story tell itself. Instead I sat down, crossed my legs, and I waited. And that moment, that particular, quiet moment, is the one I want you to hold on to before I walk you through everything that came before it. Because the woman sitting calmly in that chair was not the woman I had been 3 months earlier. 3 months earlier I was calling Diane's phone and getting no answer. I was standing in my own mother's kitchen being told I was no longer welcome without calling first. I was shaking in a parking lot trying to understand what I had done wrong. 3 months earlier, I still thought this was a misunderstanding. Then I found the bank statements. And I understood it was something else entirely. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Sandra. I am 54 years old and I have lived my entire life about 12 minutes from the house I grew up in, a white 2-story on Clover Hill Road in Cookeville, Tennessee. I have a small house, a cat named Biscuit, a garden I tend every spring, and a part-time job 3 days a week at a dental office downtown. My life is quiet. I have made it that way on purpose. My mother Eleanor is 78. She has a bad hip, macular degeneration in her left eye, and a stubborn streak that could outlast a Tennessee summer. She is not a cruel woman. I want you to understand that before anything else. She loves her daughters. She has just never loved us equally, and she has never once pretended otherwise. Diane is my younger sister by 3 years. She was always the one the family fussed over, not that I ever felt it as cruelty, it was just the weather in our house. Diane got the new Easter dress. I got hers from the year before, taken in at the waist. Diane had the car for prom. I borrowed a neighbor's. Diane's college tuition was fully covered by our parents. I took night shifts at a diner and paid off loans for the better part of a decade. I am not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. I am telling you so you understand the foundation, because the foundation matters when the whole structure comes down. What I never said to anyone, not to Janet, not to my friends, not even to Biscuit during the long Sunday evenings when I sat on the porch by myself, was that I had spent a very long time hoping Eleanor would one day just say it. Just say, "Sandra, I see you. I see what you have done and I am grateful." Not a production. Not a ceremony. Just a sentence. The smallest sentence in the world. She never did. And I had made my peace with that. Or I thought I had. When our father passed 6 years ago, I was the one who drove Eleanor to the hospital at 2 in the morning when he collapsed. I was the one who sat in the waiting room while the doctors worked. I was the one who made the phone calls the next day, planned the funeral, chose the hymns, thanked every person who came through that front door with a casserole dish. Diane flew in from Scottsdale for the service and flew back out 4 days later. After that, I became Eleanor's person. Not because anyone asked me to. Because she was my mother and she needed someone and I was there. I drove her to every appointment, and at 78, there is no shortage of appointments. I navigated Medicare paperwork and called insurance companies and spent entire Saturday mornings on hold. I did her grocery shopping every Thursday without fail, the same route, the same list, 12 items unless her stomach had been bothering her, and then I added the gentle crackers she liked. I paid her utility bills online. I helped her bathe when her hip made it too painful to manage alone. I sat with her on Sunday afternoons and watched those British baking programs she never missed. In 6 years, Diane visited 4 times. 4 times. And every time, Eleanor lit up the way she used to when it snowed. She would call me the night before and tell me to make sure the guest room was fresh. She would bake Diane's favorite peach cobbler. She would talk about Diane for days afterward in the warm, glowing way she never quite talked about me. I told myself it didn't hurt. And most days, I believed it. The last visit had been 2 years before any of this started. Diane had come for a long weekend in the fall. We had sat on the back porch, the 3 of us, sweet tea in hand, talking about nothing in particular. It had felt almost normal. When Diane left, she hugged Eleanor for a long time by the car, and Eleanor had cried, and I had carried Diane's bags to the trunk. 2 years later, on a Tuesday evening in August, Diane called me. She said she was coming home. Diane arrived on a Thursday, which was my grocery day. I had already been by Eleanor's, put everything away, checked the mail, and was just pulling out of the driveway when I saw Diane's rental car coming up the road. I could have kept going. Instead, I pulled back in. She came through the front door with 2 large bags from a specialty shop I had never heard of, olive oils, imported preserves, a tin of cookies with a French label. She kissed Eleanor on the cheek and said the house looked beautiful, which is the kind of thing you say when you haven't seen a place in 2 years and need to explain why you're noticing it now. Then she turned to me and gave me a hug that ended before it began. Sandra. Thanks for keeping things going around here. Keeping things going. Like I was the property manager. I let it sit. I said goodbye to Eleanor and went home. Over the next 2 weeks, I noticed things. Small things, the kind that don't alarm you on their own but start to add up. When I called Eleanor in the evenings, she was often already on the phone. With Diane. I could tell by the tone of her voice when she picked up, a little flatter, a little far away, like she was being pulled back toward a conversation that mattered more. She started ending our calls early. Always polite. But early. On my Thursday grocery runs, Diane was always there. I had assumed she was staying a week, maybe 10 days. But she was still there after 2 weeks, and then 3. I asked Eleanor once how long she was planning to stay, and Eleanor waved her hand cheerfully and said, "Oh, Diane's taking some time off from work." Isn't that nice, as if proximity was its own form of devotion. I watched them together. Diane was attentive in a way she had never once been before. She brought Eleanor cups of tea without being asked. She sat on the footstool beside the armchair and listened to her with that particular lean, tilted forward, eyes soft, head nodding. I have been around people long enough to know the difference between listening and performing the act of listening. One evening I stopped by unannounced. I had forgotten to drop off Eleanor's blood pressure prescription. I picked it up every month from the pharmacy on my way home from work. I knocked once and let myself in with my key, the way I had done for 6 years. Diane was at the kitchen table. Eleanor's checkbook was open in front of her. A notepad beside it had a column of numbers written in Diane's handwriting. She closed the checkbook fast. One smooth motion, like she had been ready for this exact possibility. "Sandra," she said. "You should really call ahead." "I knocked," I said. I stood in the doorway and looked at her hand still resting flat on top of the checkbook. I set the prescription on the counter. "What are you doing with Mama's checkbook?" She asked me to look at an old invoice. "From a contractor last year." She smiled pleasantly. "Nothing interesting." Eleanor called from the living room asking who was there. I said it was me. She said okay in that same distracted tone, and she did not come out of the room. I noticed, walking back through the hallway, that the door to Eleanor's little home office, a room that was usually open, was closed and the light was off. I drove home with something cold and unformed sitting in my stomach. 10 days after that, Eleanor's neighbor Gloria called me. She said she hoped she wasn't overstepping. She said she had been walking past Eleanor's front window on her way back from her mailbox and she had seen Diane sitting close to Eleanor, holding her phone up, scrolling through what looked like screenshots. Bank records, maybe. Something with numbers and dates in columns. And as she walked past, she heard Diane say, clearly enough to carry through the glass, "This is just from the last 8 months, Mama." Eleanor had put her hand over her mouth. I sat with the phone pressed to my ear for a long time after Gloria finished speaking. What screenshots? What bank records? And whose name was on them? 3 days after Gloria's call, Eleanor asked me to return my key. I had come over on a Tuesday to help with an insurance form, the kind with the small print and the boxes that require a steady hand and patience. We were at the kitchen table, side by side, working through it. And without looking up from the paper, in the same conversational tone she might use to ask me to pass the salt, Eleanor said, "Sandra, I need you to leave your key when you go today." I put the pen down. I said, "Mama." "What?" She looked up. Her face was composed in a way that did not feel like her. It felt rehearsed. Careful. Like someone had talked her through what to say and she was doing her best to deliver it naturally. "I just think it's time people called before coming by. I need my privacy. I'm not a child." "People." She said people, not you. As if my 6 years of coming and going had been the same as a stranger walking in off the street. I kept my voice even. "You're absolutely not. But I've had that key since the year Daddy passed. For emergencies. Diane has a key now," she said. "She can handle emergencies." Diane, who lived in Arizona. Diane, who had been here for 4 weeks and would presumably leave again. Diane could handle emergencies. I wanted to say so much. I said nothing. I laid the key on the table between us. That night I called Diane 3 times. No answer. I sent a text that said simply, "Can we talk?" She read it, I saw the read receipt, and did not respond. The following week, my cousin Janet called with something that hit me like a door swung open into my face. She had run into the family attorney, Howard Blevins, at the post office. They exchanged pleasantries. He mentioned he'd seen Eleanor twice that month. Said there was some estate paperwork being updated. Estate paperwork. The will. I called Howard Blevins's office that afternoon. His assistant told me he could not discuss another client's affairs. I said I understood completely. I asked only one question: had my mother been accompanied to those meetings? The assistant paused. Said she was not able to confirm anything. And then apologized. She did not say no. I also discovered, entirely by accident, that Eleanor had changed the PIN on the joint grocery account we shared. I found out when my card was declined at the store checkout with a full cart of her groceries. I called the bank. They confirmed the PIN had been changed. I paid with my own card and drove to Eleanor's house. Diane answered the door. "Oh, that," she said, when I mentioned it. "Mom just wanted to feel more secure. It's her account." She closed the door between us. I sat in my car for a minute. And then I drove around to the back of the house and opened the garage with the code Eleanor had never changed. She barely remembered it existed. I let myself in, climbed the stairs to the attic, and started going through boxes. The attic smelled like old paper and cedar and the particular kind of dust that settles on things no one has touched in years. Our father had been meticulous. He kept paper records for everything, tax returns going back to the 1980s, receipts for every appliance we had ever owned, folders labeled in his neat block handwriting. After he died, I had boxed it all up and put it here. I had always meant to come back and sort through it properly. It took me 20 minutes of moving boxes and shifting plastic sheeting before I found the shoebox. It was tucked behind an old broken lamp, under a folded tarp. My mother's handwriting on the lid. Joint account, household. Inside were bank statements for an account I had never known existed. I sat down on a dusty steamer trunk and started reading. The account was a savings account, opened 30 years ago in both my parents' names. After my father died, it had transferred to Eleanor's name alone. There had been a balance of just over $22,000. The withdrawals began 8 months ago. Cash withdrawals, $300 to $500 at a time, roughly every 2 to 3 weeks. Always from the same ATM, a branch on the east side of Cookeville. $11,000 total, gone in small steady increments over 7 months. My hands started to shake. I had never once used that ATM. I did not even know that account existed. I had no card for it, no PIN, no access of any kind. I photographed every page. I put the shoebox back exactly where I had found it, made sure the tarp looked undisturbed, and climbed back down the attic stairs. I left through the garage. I sat in the alley behind Eleanor's house in my car and tried to breathe. Someone had been making those withdrawals. Someone who lived or traveled on the east side of town. Someone with access to Eleanor's card and the PIN. Diane's rental car was parked on the east side every night she stayed in Cookeville. I knew because Janet had mentioned passing it once on the way to the pharmacy. But I still needed the other piece. I still needed to understand what Diane had shown our mother on her phone. The thing that had started all of this. I called Gloria that afternoon. Gloria has lived next door to my mother for 22 years. She is sharp and steady and does not exaggerate. She walked me through the window scene again, this time more carefully. She said the screenshots on Diane's phone had looked like bank records, numbers in columns, dates, transaction labels. Diane had scrolled through them slowly, letting Eleanor look at each one. At one point Eleanor had reached out and touched the screen, the way older people do when they're trying to get a closer look. Diane had tilted the phone and said, "See this one? And this one? 8 months, Mama. And she has had your key the whole time." The room went cold around me. She had taken the real withdrawal history, her own withdrawals, and she had shown them to our mother as if they were mine. The account. The dates. The amounts. All of it real. All of it attributed to the wrong person. My 6 years of having that key had become the frame for her picture. I understood it then, the full shape of it. And I understood something else too. Diane had a timeline. She was working toward a signed will. Which meant I had to move faster than she expected. Before we go any further, I want to take just a moment to speak to everyone watching. This channel exists because stories like Sandra's happen every single day, inside ordinary houses, around ordinary dinner tables, in families that look perfectly fine from the outside. We gather these accounts from real people, protect every identifying detail, and share them so that others can recognize what they might be living through themselves. If this story is hitting close to home for you, please subscribe to the channel. Hitting that button is what makes it possible to keep bringing you more. And now, back to Sandra. The first thing I did was go to the bank, not the branch Eleanor normally used, but the main downtown branch, the bigger one on Commerce Street. I dressed like I was going to work. I asked to speak with a manager. And when the manager came out, I used 4 specific words: elder financial abuse. I had looked them up the night before. I wanted to be sure I was using the right language, because language changes how seriously people respond. Those words changed the entire tone of the conversation. The manager, a woman named Patricia, had a calm and unhurried manner that immediately put me at ease. She brought me into a private office, closed the door, and listened to everything I said without interrupting. I showed her the photographs of the old statements on my phone. I told her about the ATM on the east side, the 8-month pattern, the cash amounts. She turned to her computer and was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "The card tied to this account was used 17 times at that ATM location over a 9-month period. The withdrawal amounts and dates are consistent with what you're showing me. And there is a note here: the card was reported as lost approximately 6 months ago and a replacement was issued." Lost. The replacement card, I said. Who would have picked it up? Patricia looked at the screen. Cards are typically mailed to the address on file. Or they can be picked up in person by someone with proper identification and authority on the account. She paused. A family member with a power of attorney, for example. Diane had spent weeks sitting at that kitchen table going through Eleanor's paperwork. Patricia gave me an official printed statement, bank-stamped, dated, showing the full withdrawal history. She also told me I could file a formal report with Adult Protective Services, and she slid a card across the desk. I called Adult Protective Services from the parking lot. The caseworker, a patient man named Marcus, asked me careful, methodical questions. He explained that in cases involving potential financial exploitation of an elderly person by a family member, they conduct an independent wellness interview, without other family present. He said the complaint would be formally documented from that day. Cases involving documented financial records, he added, tend to move more quickly. Document everything from your end as well, he told me. I called a family law attorney the following week, not Howard Blevins, who had already been compromised by Diane's visits. A different one, in a town over, recommended by my friend Patrice. His name was Dennis Webb, and he had been practicing for 30 years. He listened to the full story without writing anything down, and then he picked up his pen and said, "Start from the beginning again. Slower this time." I did. When I finished, he said, "What you're describing is a textbook pattern. Isolation of the elder. Introduction of fabricated evidence to undermine the trusted caregiver. Influence over estate planning. The question that matters most right now is whether the new will has already been executed." It hadn't. I had already confirmed that through Janet's contact. Dennis said that gave us a window. He explained that wills executed under undue influence can be contested, but it is significantly cleaner to intervene before the signing than to litigate after it. He told me to gather everything I could and come back in a week. Then I went to see Gloria. I told her what I needed. I told her she didn't have to do it, that there was no obligation, that things might get uncomfortable. Gloria listened, then folded her hands on the table and said, "Your father was my neighbor for 31 years. He was a decent man. Write me up something to sign." I drafted the statement that evening. 3 paragraphs. What she saw. What she heard. The date and the time. I brought it to the UPS store the following Friday morning, and Gloria signed it in front of a notary without a moment's hesitation. I had the official bank statement. I had Gloria's notarized account. I had an attorney who knew what we were dealing with. And I had a complaint logged with Adult Protective Services. Diane thought she had already won. She thought the will was nearly ready, that Eleanor was firmly in her pocket, and that I was too confused and hurt to do anything but wait by the phone. I want to tell you what those 3 weeks of waiting felt like, because I think it matters. They were not dramatic. They were not filled with righteous energy. They were long and quiet, and there were several nights where I lay awake and wondered if I was wrong about all of it, if maybe there was an explanation I hadn't thought of, if maybe Diane was simply misguided rather than calculating. I called Dennis twice with questions that were really just the same anxiety dressed up in different clothes, and he answered them the same patient way both times. I went to Eleanor's on my Thursdays. I knocked before I came in. I brought the groceries and put them away and made small talk with Diane and did not let a single thing in my face betray what I knew. It was the hardest kind of acting, the kind where you have to pretend that everything is ordinary when you are sitting on something that could blow the room apart. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away. I set the envelope on my nightstand and I waited. Thanksgiving at Eleanor's house was a tradition that had held for my entire life. Eleanor cooked the turkey. The table that seated 12 was always full. My cousin Janet came every year with her husband. 2 of Eleanor's church friends, Vera and Nell, always brought the sweet potato casserole. Gloria came most years, and Eleanor always made sure there was a chair pulled up for her at the corner closest to the kitchen. I had not told anyone what I was planning. Not Janet, not Gloria, not Dennis Webb. I had simply called Eleanor and confirmed I was coming and asked if I could bring a pie. Eleanor, sounding careful on the phone, said yes. I brought the pecan pie. And inside the interior pocket of my coat, I brought the plain manila envelope. Diane was already there when I arrived. She moved through Eleanor's kitchen with an ease that settled under my skin, the proprietary, unhurried ease of someone who has already decided the territory belongs to her. She looked at me when I walked in. Her smile was pleasant, blank, and entirely closed. The dinner itself was what Thanksgiving always was. 14 people, overlapping conversations, somebody's grandchild running through the hallway. Eleanor looked tired but happy. Janet caught my eye across the table once and held my gaze a beat too long, as if she sensed something in the air. I ate my turkey. I watched Diane refill Eleanor's water glass without being asked. I watched her touch Eleanor's arm and laugh too brightly at things that weren't quite funny. I watched her glance at me twice with an expression that was almost sympathetic, as if she felt sorry for what was about to happen to me. After dessert, when the plates had been pushed back and the room had settled into that loose, warm after-dinner hour, Diane stood up. She said she had something difficult to share with the family. That she was bringing it up now, in front of everyone, because she believed in honesty. That it had been weighing on her for months and she could not in good conscience stay silent through another holiday. I watched her reach into her bag. I watched her pull out the manila folder, that dollar store folder I had pictured 100 times since Gloria first called me. She set it on the table in front of Eleanor and rested her hands on top of it. "Mom," she said. "I am so sorry to do this here. But I think our family deserves to know what has been happening with your finances." The table went quiet. 14 people looking at the folder. Eleanor's hands, already in her lap, went still. Diane said my name. She said I had access to accounts. She said the evidence was documented right there, dates, amounts, a pattern going back 8 months. She said she had discovered it in September and had tried to handle it privately and that it had broken her heart, but that our mother's safety came before her own comfort. She was composed. Measured. Almost sorrowful. She had rehearsed every word and she delivered them well. She even paused at the right moments. She had studied how grief was supposed to sound. I let her finish. I did not interrupt. I did not look away. I let the silence sit for 3 full seconds after she stopped speaking. Long enough for the room to feel the weight of what she had just said. Long enough for everyone to turn and look at me and wait for my reaction. Then I reached inside my coat and I set my envelope on the table. Diane's eyes went to it immediately. And for just a moment, the smallest fraction of a moment, I saw something flicker in them that was not grief or confidence or rehearsed sorrow. It was recognition. She knew what a manila envelope meant. She had brought one herself. I opened it slowly. I laid out 4 documents in a row on the white tablecloth. "I have something to share too," I said. The first document was the official bank statement from Patricia at the downtown branch, stamped, dated, signed by the manager. It showed 17 ATM withdrawals over 9 months, all from a single machine on the east side of Cookville. Total removed, $11,240. "Diane," I said, "you stay on the east side when you're in town. You always have." The color in her face did not change. Not yet. The second document was the bank manager's written notation confirming that the ATM card for this account had been reported lost 6 months ago and a replacement issued, and that withdrawals had continued on the replacement card. Who reported the card lost, Diane? Who would have had access to Mama's desk to find a replacement card in the mail? Now something shifted in her jaw. The third document was Gloria's notarized statement. I did not read the whole thing. I read one sentence, slowly and clearly. I observed Diane showing Eleanor photographs on her phone and heard her say, "This is just from the last 8 months, Mama," while Eleanor became visibly distressed. I set it down. I looked around the table. At Vera, one hand pressed flat to her chest. At Janet, whose face had gone completely still. At Eleanor, sitting in her chair, looking at the documents like she was trying to understand a language she had once known. Diane showed Mama screenshots and told her those withdrawals were mine, I said. But the withdrawals come from an account I have never had access to. They match dates when Diane was in town. And they start exactly when Diane's visits began. Diane's voice came out sharp and slightly too fast. Those records don't prove anything. You could have used a different card. And the fourth document, I said. I set it down. It was a single page on firm letterhead from Dennis Webb's office. It stated that a formal complaint had been filed with Adult Protective Services regarding suspected financial exploitation of Eleanor Harris by a family member, and that the matter was currently under active review. The room was absolutely still. Not the comfortable quiet of after dinner. A different kind of still. I looked at my mother. Eleanor's face had done something I had never seen it do in 54 years. Not anger. Not surprise, exactly. Something slower than both of those. The expression of someone who has just felt a belief they have been holding very tightly, quietly, without knowing how tightly, begin to give way. She was looking at the documents and then at me, and I could see the moment when the weight of 6 years sat differently in her mind than it had 60 seconds before. Mama, I said, quietly. I have shown up for you every Thursday for 6 years. I have never taken a single dollar from you. I never would. Diane opened her mouth. Janet cut her off. Diane. Stop talking. And she did. Eleanor reached across the table. She laid her hand over mine. She did not say a word. She just held on, the way she used to when I was small and something had frightened me, and I held her hand back and neither of us let go for a long time. Diane gathered her coat from the hook by the door. She picked up her bag. She did not say goodbye to anyone in the room. The front door closed behind her with a sound that seemed to move through the whole house. Here is what happened after that Thanksgiving. Adult Protective Services completed their independent interview with Eleanor 2 weeks later. My mother told the caseworker everything, including what Diane had shown her on the phone, what Diane had told her to say, and what Diane had suggested about my intentions toward her. The case was escalated. The bank froze the account pending investigation. Faced with the documentation and the APS case, Diane hired her own attorney. She agreed to repay the full amount, $11,240, in exchange for the complaint being closed without a criminal referral. She did not admit wrongdoing in writing. She did not call our mother to apologize. She has not come back to Cookeville since. Eleanor and I had a long conversation in her living room the week after Thanksgiving. She cried, the kind of crying that comes from a very deep place, the kind that doesn't make much noise. She told me Diane had said I was planning to put her in a facility. That I had been bleeding her dry slowly and she just hadn't noticed. That all the caregiving had been a long strategy to make myself look indispensable before the inheritance. I listened to all of it without interrupting. Mama, I said when she was finished, I have been coming over every Thursday for 6 years. I have never once asked what's in your will. I have never once thought about it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she looked at me in a way she almost never had, directly, and without the particular softness she always reserved for Diane, and she said, I know. She put her face in her hands for a long moment. Then I held her. Not because everything was repaired, it was not fully, not yet. But because she was still my mother and she was still sitting in that blue armchair, and I had not spent 30 years being her person just to walk away now. My key is back on my key ring. Now, I want to share something with you, because this channel is not just about the story. It is about the pattern inside the story. What Diane did was not simply lying. It was something more deliberate than that. She did not invent a story out of nothing. She took something real, the actual bank records, the actual dates, the actual amounts, and she reassembled them to point at a different person. That is the particular cruelty of what manipulative people do when they target a caregiver. They take your history of showing up and they reverse it. Every year you were present becomes another year of opportunity. Every key, every account access, every Thursday visit becomes a brick in their case against you. The very things that prove your devotion get reframed as your motive. And Eleanor believed it, not because she was weak, but because she already carried a quiet guilt about the favoritism. People who feel guilty about something are far easier to convince of the worst. Diane understood that about their mother the way only a sibling can, and she used it without mercy. Understanding that didn't make any of it hurt less. But it made it make sense. And when something makes sense, you can finally put it down. The stories on this channel come from real forums and personal accounts shared online, and all identifying details have been changed to protect those involved. If this story resonated with you, if you recognized something in it, please consider subscribing. Your support is what allows me to keep bringing these stories to you, and it truly matters more than I can say. I hope you'll come back next time, right here on Revenge Stories.